Good morning. This is Jose Toron, IRENA's Regional Program Officer for Latin America and the Caribbean. It is an honor to welcome you to this virtual event, Advancing the Energy Transition in Latin America through Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs. I will lead the Master of Ceremonies during the event. It is my pleasure to join you today. I would like to remind you that we have both English and Spanish translation throughout the event, selecting it at the bottom right of your screen. Les recuerdo que tenemos interpretación en inglés a español durante todo el evento, seleccionándola en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. I take the opportunity to also welcome all the participants that are online today. We have representatives from 51 countries and a total of 225 registered participants in the event. I would also like to give a special welcome to the Director General of IRENA, the Director of Mitigation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Regional Ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UK COP26 Presidency for joining us today in this seminar. I would like to mention some general announcements for today's virtual session. Make sure to mute yourself during the session to avoid background noise. If you encounter any technical issues, please write your issue in the chat box. If you have questions to the speaker, please use the Q&A option. Next, please. The slides will be shared via email after the end of the webinar. A recording of the webinar will be available. And please tell us how we did in the survey to help us improve. I will briefly mention the agenda set for day one of this event. The event will begin with opening remarks from IRENA, UNFCCC, and the UK COP26 Presidency. We will continue with IRENA's presentation on the enhancement of NDCs in Latin America and the Caribbean. At the end of this presentation, we will go on with a panel discussion moderated by UK COP26 Presidency that will feature representatives of the governments of Jamaica and Chile, as well as the United Nations Development Programme and NDC Partnership, who will discuss opportunities and challenges for the improvement of NDCs in Latin America and the Caribbean. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Director General of IRENA, Francesco Lacamera, the Director of Mitigation of UNFCCC, James Grabber, and the Regional Ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UK COP26 Presidency, Fiona Clowder, to turn on their cameras to kick off the first part of the evening with their opening remarks. Now I continue with Director General Francesco Lacamera for his opening remarks. Over to you, Director Lacamera.
Thank you, Jose. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all today. I'd like to thank our co-organizer, the UK COP26 Presidency and the UNFCCC, for their continuous collaborative effort. In the run-up to the COP26 next year, IRENA has been working closely with the UK Presidency to facilitate a series of dialogue with national counterparts in different regions around the world. I'm very pleased to see strong cooperation from our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean for making this event possible. Our partnership with UNFCCC has also contributed significantly to IRENA's effort in supporting countries in their NDC revision process. We worked closely with the Regional Collaboration Center in St. George in Panama to identify areas where IRENA can lend support to specific countries, especially in the small island developing states in the Caribbean. Strong international cooperation in advancing these efforts are more crucial now than ever before, as we address the twin challenges of the health and climate crisis. We witnessed the devastating effect of climate change in the past week, as hurricanes ravage countries in Central America and the Caribbean. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my solidarity to all communities and families affected by this extreme weather event. Additionally, the ongoing global pandemic has taken a high toll on lives and livelihoods and create considerable uncertainty in what looked to be a very challenging post-COVID world. ARENA has strongly advocated that in navigating through these uncertain times, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement should act as our compass. In our recent post-COVID recovery report, we have outlined a set of actionable policy recommendations that chart the path towards a sustainable future by prioritizing the energy transition in recovery measures. We strongly believe that linking the short-term recovery to the medium and long-term strategy is paramount to kick-starting our economy and create jobs and open up new growth and development possibilities. According to our analysis, government funds can guide and leverage private investment by a factor of 3 or 4. Strategic decisions in this regard can accelerate the ongoing energy transition, while adding, in our estimate, more than 5.5 million jobs over the next 3 years in the recovery phase. In the case of Latin America and Caribbean, accelerating the energy transition can lead to a total of 6 million jobs in the energy sector by 2030 and provide an additional cumulative $306 billion in GDP gain during the same period. In this context, it is encouraging to see that countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are positioning the energy sector at the core of the post-COVID recovery of the region. By making strategic investment and policy choices that focus on energy transition, we can strengthen the economic recovery, bolster sustainable development, and set the course towards a fully decarbonized system by the middle of this century, as the Paris Agreement required. ARENA has been actively engaged in supporting our members in helping them navigate towards a clean energy transition with our comprehensive body of technical assistance and analytical work. Work with several partners, including UNFCCC, UK COP26 presidency, Undp Climate Promise Initiative, and Undp partnership led by my friend Pablo Vieira. We are engaged in assisting 66 countries across the world on enhancement and implementation of the NDCs. These countries represent a total amount of emissions of around 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. Latin America and the Caribbean is an active region in this work. We are currently engaging with 18 countries, providing support in areas such as data and statistics, target setting, technology roadmap, decarbonization plan, setting up monitoring, verification, and reporting systems, among others. We are pleased to see the strong commitment of countries in the region in taking this opportunity to review the NDCs, raising ambition, and expanding scope for uptake of renewables beyond the power sector. Countries like Chile, Cuba, Grenada, Jamaica, and Suriname have been the front runners in submitting their revised climate commitment this year, and many others are aiming to achieve during the upcoming weeks. This today virtual meeting will aim to serve as a platform for exchanging experience, lessons learned, and best practice in the region, as well as understanding the role of NDCs in the post-COVID-19 recovery plans. It will feature discussion around the existing NDC support mechanism in the region, together with country experience on the NDC revision process and its alignment with long-term energy policies and strategies. Finally, it will provide an overview of financing options for the successful achievement of the country's national commitment. I wish you all a fruitful discussion, and I thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you, Director Nakamura, for these words. Now I would like to invite UNFCCC Director of Mitigation, James Grabert, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, Director Grabert.
Hello, everyone. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to join you virtually to this event aimed at advancing the energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean through nationally determined contributions. As you heard, I'm James Grabert. I'm the director at UNFCCC for the Mitigation Division. Let me express my gratitude first to our partners in organizing the event, the International Renewable Energy Agency and the UK COP26 presidency team. Let me begin by emphasizing that we are all part of one of the most significant developments of the 21st century, a massive decarbonization of economies to achieve net zero emissions, hopefully by 2050, if not soon after. This is what countries have agreed under the Paris Agreement and what science tells us we need to achieve to preserve a livable climate and limit climate change related damages. The objective of the UNFCCC is to prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. In pursuing this objective, the goal of the Paris Agreement is to reach a global balance of emissions and removals. This internationally agreed goal requires the global community to move quickly to reduce greenhouse gases and to enhance removals. So to achieve this, governments must significantly and immediately boost their climate change ambition and be accountable for meeting their pledges. We must slash emissions as soon as possible, 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. There is no other path. There is no alternate universe. There is no plan B. It's simply what we must do. Today, 75% of global emissions are caused by our need for energy, electricity, heat, transportation, etc. If we continue to rely on fossil fuels, we will have catastrophically failed in our task. What is needed is a complete transformation of our energy system. And by that, I mean a successful transformation will require that the extraction and transformation of fossil fuels into electricity, transportation, and heating fuel products needs to be rapidly eliminated. By 2050, electricity needs to be zero emissions, renewables, and 100% mitigated with removals. These needs to be achieved earlier in some countries if we are really to meet the goal of Article 4 of the Paris Agreement. So what can be electrified needs to be electrified, particularly transport and those actions that continue to rely on unsustainable use of biomass. Where liquid and gaseous fuels are still needed, for example, in long distance transport and in industry, we need to support the development and commercialization of technologies that are already well known to use our soon to be zero emission electricity to produce e-liquids and e-gases. This will be a difficult task, but a necessary one and one that is achievable. At the beginning of the year, our co-host IRENA released its first global renewables outlook, and I would like to highlight a few key takeaways. Generation capacity increased by 176 gigawatts in 2019. That's more than a 7% rise from the previous year. It showed that annual capacity additions from renewables are regularly outpacing those from fossil fuels, and that the renewables now account for 1/3 of global power capacity. Moreover, the report highlights that transforming the energy system could lead to a higher GDP growth, achieving 2.4% more by mid-century than current plans, and would increase renewable jobs to 42 million globally by 2050, 4 times more than today. Granted, these numbers were calculated before the COVID crisis, but the bottom line is that renewable energy will boost the economy and create new quality jobs. As governments around take actions to address and recover from COVID-19 crisis, it's critical that our efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and to improve resilience against climate change are incorporated into the recovery packages for this pandemic. The actions toward energy transition play a very important role in this. When we talk about building forward, this is a kind of recovery we're talking about, one focusing on people, their health, their safety, and a world that is both resilient and sustainable. But we must ensure that nobody is left behind in this transition. We cannot repeat the same old story where we've seen many times in the past when a great transition and change has resulted in people and entire nations falling by the wayside. That's why it's important that nations ensure that this transition from fossil fuels to renewables, for example, is a just transition, one that helps workers readjust for the clean energy economy. What does that mean? It means the government's establishing the programs and policies that will help people make a transition to new industries. Jobs related to renewable energy are growing exponentially, but if people don't have the skills to work in those areas, we will have big problems. We want the age of renewable energy to improve the lives of workers, not in their lives. Step towards achieving this energy transition must be reflected in the upcoming nationally determined contributions. This is what I want to point out, that this is necessary, and also to remind us all that they are still due in 2020. We no longer have the luxury of time, and time is running out in this year alone. Submission of these indices is paramount, regardless of COVID. We cannot achieve this parallel action of recovery from COVID and building a more sustainable future without immediate plans to boost those indices. Despite the challenges posed by COVID, a number of countries have already submitted their new or updated indices. We know that more will follow by the end of this year and towards COP26 next year. The coherence between these indices and energy policy is critical to achieve the ambitious targets that we want to see in those indices. Without linking indices with specific energy policy targets and actions, indices will run the risk of becoming just a commitment exercise, not mainstream into the energy policy. So the well-prepared indices with clear pathways towards the energy transition will help send a clear message to the business and investors communities about the direction of travel and channel finance towards energy transition efforts. In addition to indices that provide the near-term goals that countries are committing to be accountable for achieving, this clear message to the business and investors communities can also be sent in the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies that the Paris Agreement has invited governments to formulate. In many countries, the development of the long-term strategies this year may not have happened in time to inform the NDC target. Looking ahead to future revisions of NDCs, policymakers can proactively steer climate policy planning processes to align the NDCs to long-term climate strategies and policies toward energy transition. For those of you interested in long-term planning, I would recommend that you participate in the event next week on Thursday the 17th. ARENA and the UNFCCC are co-hosting a webinar on net zero emission scenarios by 2050. With focus on linkages between long-term energy strategies and climate strategies. Information will be available shortly on the ARENA website. Looking ahead towards mid-century, many countries have already announced goals for climate neutrality, including most recently the Republic of Korea and China. And the incoming US administration has also previously announced an intention towards such a target. In this context, I draw your attention to the Climate Ambition Alliance, led by Chile and launched at the Climate Action Summit in New York in 2019. The Climate Ambition Alliance aims to bring together nations to renew their push towards ambitious NDCs and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. For those that are not yet members, there is still time to join the growing global commitment. Finally, I would like to also highlight that the two University Regional Collaboration Centers in Panama and St. George's that support the Latin America and Caribbean countries are planning to provide further support on mitigation efforts next year, especially in the context of NDCs, long-term strategies, and sector policies. So please turn to them for assistance. Thank you so much. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you, Director Grabert, for those words. I would like now to invite the Regional Ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UK COP26 Presidency, Ambassador Fiona Clowder, to deliver her opening remarks. Your Excellency, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jose. And thank you very much to Irina and the other organisers for the invitation to speak at this important meeting, at this important time on our COP agenda. Our world is changing, and as the COP26 President-designate Alex Sharma has said, tackling climate change is one of the most urgent shared endeavours of our lifetimes, demanding bold action from every nation to prevent catastrophic global warming. And Francesco and James, in those very powerful speeches, have outlined both why this is so important and also how we might go about it and the vital role that NDCs play. So I'm not going to repeat all the points they have so eruditely made, but I'm really asking people to think about making this real. We're not talking about nationally determined contributions simply as a formal mechanism that is part of our international system. These are living documents that we need to turn into reality. And it's both about articulating the vision, which we can all bring to moving towards a net zero world, but also about turning that into action. The UK will be hosting COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference, in partnership with Italy in November 2021. Obviously, our world is much changed by COVID-19, but that does not mean the urgency of this action has gone away, quite the contrary. So our conference will now take place in November 2021 in Glasgow, and we hope to welcome you to that event. But in the meantime, there is an enormous amount of work that we can all do together. The negotiations for COP are obviously a key part of the international process. And the specialist negotiators are already getting together. We've seen the UN climate change dialogues in the last week that have been, I think, very successful in opening up important areas for discussion. Also under our presidency, we want to really encourage action, as it were, in the real world. And we're doing that through 5 campaigns on adaptation and resilience, on the opportunities in the energy transition, on clean transport, on the very important role that nature and nature-based systems can play in addressing climate change and also preserving biodiversity. And also to take all of this forward, the role of finance, both mobilizing more finance to help with green and development projects, but also about transforming business culture and optimizing financial opportunities for the private sector, to that in turn help drive the sort of economic change that Francesco and James have just been talking about. And I'd also like to emphasize the point that James made, that COP26 is an inclusive process, and it's about creating a just and a fair world for people in this transition to net zero. And so it's very much our message that everyone is in. There are the big players, the big emitters that we hope will focus their efforts and really drive change in our world. But there are many smaller, more vulnerable countries, many of whom are already suffering the impacts of climate change, and their voice is just as important. We also want to make this inclusive COP in not just being about governments talking to one another, but also very much about involving business, wider society, and including young people. For the UK, we're also ourselves trying to take forward this agenda. And you've seen in the news, I hope, just in the last few weeks, first of all, our Prime Minister announced a 10-point plan, what he calls a plan for a green industrial revolution, whereby we've looked at the sectors of our own economy in the UK and how they can be transformed by adopting the green agenda and creating 1,000 more jobs, hundreds of thousands more jobs, and uniting business, academia, NGOs and local communities in a common goal to go forward further and faster in tackling climate change. This week, the UK has announced its own NDC, an ambitious plan to reduce greenhouse gases by 68% by 2030 and to reach net zero in 2050. And it's not going to be easy. We recognize these plans that we're drawing up ourselves, the plans that we are excited in seeing other countries coming forward with. It's not going to be easy to take it forward, but united we can do, and we can all help one another in those endeavors. We look forward to an event that we are hosting in partnership with the UN, with France, with Chile and Italy, that will take place on Saturday, the 12th of December, so this weekend. And we hope very much that you will dial in and join us all. And this event, the Climate Ambition Summit, is both a celebration of 5 years since Paris. And I think let's all reflect on the great achievements that were made through the COP meeting in Paris and the Paris Agreement, and what has happened since. But we all know that is not enough, and that our understanding of our changing world, the science has informed us that there is now a huge gap between our aspiration to keep temperature rise within 1.5 degrees and the reality of where the world is heading. And that makes the process that we are all going through in developing these NDCs and the long-term strategies ever more important. And so on Saturday, we have invited world leaders to share with us their own ambitious plans to cut emissions and set net zero targets. Because as our Prime Minister has said, this is a global effort. And so I hope through this conference, the many other meetings in which we all join together, we can exchange ideas, we can share best practice, we can be honest about the barriers and challenges, and together we can find solutions, we can find ways forward, and we can build a better world. Thank you. Jose, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Clauder, for this message. We now have the necessary context to start a deep and productive discussion. We now turn to Mr. Binu Parthan, Head of Regions of the Country Engagement and Partnerships Division at IRENA, who will deliver a presentation on the work that the agency carries out in Latin America and the Caribbean in order to support countries in improving their NDCs and the tools used to assist with implementation plans. Binu, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jose. And as the Director General alluded to, we express our solidarity with people of being affected by the extreme weather events in the last few weeks in the region. This is also a stark reminder to the impacts and the scale of loss and damage that can happen as a result of climate change. However, at IRENA, we believe, the next slide, please, is that with energy transition being, climate action being driven by energy transition, with Renewable Energy Center, it is possible for us to reduce emissions in line with the Paris Agreement objectives by about 70% lower and being within the 2% temperature rise window. But also with those environmental and climate change benefits, it is also possible for us to have significant levels of additional job creation, about 22 million or so. And this could, the falling costs in terms of renewable energy investments would also mean that each dollar which is invested in renewable energy and energy transition will result in a significantly attractive payback of about $3 to $8 for each dollar invested. One of the objectives also of the Sustainable Development Goals is to provide 100% energy access by 2030. With this energy transition, the 100% universal energy access is also possible. And we would have all these environmental and socio-economic benefits, but also an added improvement in energy security. Our scenario does show that 64% of fossil fuel consumption would actually be reduced if we go along this scenario. So this is something which is very much possible. Next slide, please. And if we look at the regional picture here, Latin America is indeed a region which has got significant levels of renewable energy in the energy system. with this particular scenario of energy transition with renewable energy at the center, we will be able to halve the emissions on an annual basis. We expect that a lot of it will be driven by electrification of the end-use sectors, particularly transport and buildings, etc. We do see that there is opportunity. Currently, the level of renewable energy penetration, the power system is at about 66%, and there is possibility to improve that to about 93% or so. So the key takeaways are really renewable energy and electrification, and this is what is likely to drive energy transition in this region and beyond, with positive economic and socioeconomic benefits. Next slide, please. So with this belief, we did start looking at what has been done in the past round of submissions of NDCs. And what we found is that while over 140 NDCs do mention renewable energy, only about 2/3 of that, about 105, do have specifically quantified targets for renewable energy, which can be monitored and achieved and monitored. And there, the global average is about 67%, and Latin America has actually done better there. But our analysis also shows that since 2015 and up until now, the actual development of renewable energy driven by innovation, investment, cost reductions, etc., have actually been more than what is reflected in the past round of NDCs. And this is something that we are trying to address. Next slide, please. Over the last 1 year or so, what we have done is to deploy the skill sets that are available with the agency to support our member countries to ensure that this energy transition can be reflected in the NDCs, taking advantage of this opportunity to submit updated NDCs this year and next year. So this effort has actually taken us to work with over 66 countries that the Director General alluded to, where we've been supporting them on a range of issues, but primarily with the objective that we, in line with our transforming energy scenario, we try to enhance the renewable energy ambition in these NDCs to a level where we will be within the climate, the Paris Agreement objectives. So next slide, please. Particularly, we do find that of all IRENA's expertise that is available to the countries, there's a lot of interest in our data and statistics and MRV work, directly relevant to the ICTU framework, the clarity, transparency, and understanding of NDCs, which is important to ensure that, as was mentioned earlier, the NDCs are not just documents, they are reflected in national policies and then go on to achieve specific achievements in energy transition and renewable energy development. So this is one area where there's a lot of support is being provided to countries by IRENA. We're also seeing a lot of demand for our modeling, renewable energy roadmap, and long-term energy planning work. And these are used to explore different scenarios to increase the renewable energy in the energy system. And increasingly, countries are using that to try and increase the ambition in the energy sector, power sector, end-use sectors, etc. There's also increasing interest in the project facilitation support. And this is a new venture by IRENA, where we are trying to ensure that renewable energy projects in our member countries do receive financing, international or local, to realize them using our hand-holding support. And there's a lot of interest in that. And a lot of this would be evident in the post NDC submission phase, where specific initiatives which are captured in the NDCs move forward and will seek funding to get implemented. We're also seeing a lot of interest in our tool on renewable readiness assessment, which is a process, a country-owned, country-led process that we have, where countries actually identify the short to medium-term opportunities and the actions which need to be carried out to mainstream renewable energy in their countries. And we're increasingly seeing that a number of countries are using RRAs, the renewable readiness assessments, to inform and influence their LTS plans as well. Apart from these, there are a number of interests from capacity building, also policy support and enabling frameworks, very important aspect. There's also interest in a number of countries to assess the renewable energy resources properly. so that more investments and developments can happen in renewable energy. And we are also in a number of countries where the renewable energy penetration is significantly higher. There's also an increase to look at system flexibility issues and how they can integrate more renewable energy in their grid systems. Next slide, please. So in the region, this is the snapshot of where we are working, and you'll find a significant share of work which is done in the small island developing states in the Caribbean. And as the DG alluded to, we are working in about 18 countries in the region. And we are working with a number of valued partners, many of whom are here in this meeting today. We do work with Undp, an important partner under the Climate Promise Initiative, working in a range of countries, starting from high emitters to LDCs to SIDS, etc. We do work very closely with NDC Partnerships CAP program, where a number of countries in the Caribbean, SIDS, as well as other regions in Pacific, etc., are being supported by IRENA. We've also worked closely with the Climate Change Secretariat, particularly the regional collaborating centers in the Latin American region, as well as other regions, where countries which are not being supported by other global initiatives are linked to IRENA, and we try and provide support. And of late, we've also finding working arrangements with the European Union's Technical Assistance Facility, which is trying to align their work with ours and supporting IRENA's delivery of support in the countries that we operate in a manner that a sort of a collaborative effort to join forces and ensure that the technical resources available in the EU are aligned with the requests that IRENA is getting, and then jointly providing the NDC enhancement support. Apart from all these, there are countries which are IRENA members reaching out to us for NDC support, which is also something that we are providing. So we do have these 5 different channels, and the demand for IRENA's services and NDC enhancement is increasing on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So this is a detail of the countries that in the region that we're working on. I wouldn't go into more details, but just to say that there's been a lot of interest in looking at data gaps and reviewing the targets. We've been asked to support decarbonization plans in the short term up until 2030 or so, what can be done focusing on transportation, etc. Also developing various decarbonization and long-term scenarios using remap and also the flexibility tool, assessing power sector high shares of renewable energy integration in the power sector, as well as actions to strengthening actions towards renewable energy deployment, and also supporting the regulatory framework. Next slide, please. Increasingly, we're getting more interest in implementation of supports, essentially NDCs which have been submitted or where the follow-on actions are clear as to how we can move them forward using our technical assistance as well as project facilitation services. Some of the examples are like what we're doing in St. Lucia, like the Solar City Simulator, where our resource assessment team is able to provide tools, a web-based tool, which will allow the country to implement rooftop solar PV systems. There is also interest in accessing financial mechanisms, such as the Green Climate Fund, where we're working with countries in the region to ensure that they can, through IRENA's project facilitation support, access global financing mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund. There are also other efforts we are providing in terms of energy management, looking at energy audits, etc., and also modeling and long-term energy strategies. So these are some of the snapshot of the types of support that we're providing to countries in the region. Next slide, please. What is also very important is once the countries do submit these NDCs, what is it that IRENA can continue to do? So what we hope to do, and we're already starting discussions with a number of countries in the region and beyond, is where we could work with the countries to develop NDC implementation plans, particularly for energy transition and where renewable energy is relevant. And we could also work with countries to ensure that the investment frameworks are upgraded and enhanced so that they can attract international or private sector investments into energy transition and renewable energy. Of course, there are always needs for capacity building, more at the institutional and human level. Our division on PFS, project facilitation and support, the director of which Ahmed Bada will be speaking tomorrow, are actually identifying a pipeline of possible projects, both from public and private sector. And these are being syndicated, and we hope to support these countries and the projects to find finance and be implemented. And this is done through a platform in partnership with Undp and Sustainable Energy for All, called the Climate Investment Platform, where we do project pre-screening, we do provide project preparation and coaching support, and improve the projects and move them towards bankability. And we also hope to ensure that these projects, some of the better ones, go into the pipeline of international or national financial institutions and then provide financial support. And last but not the least, we do hope once the pandemic abates and it is possible to have physical events, we do hope to bring at a sub-region level key stakeholders together to try and showcase and do physical matchmaking of projects, so that some of these projects, renewable energy and energy transition, which are reflected in the NDCs, can find finance and then can be implemented. We do hope to start this process very soon, hopefully early part of next year, if not earlier. Next slide, please. So this essentially is an overview of what IRENA is doing, but the key point is that we are bringing our analytical and technical skills to the countries, working with them to enhance the renewable energy ambition in the NDCs. But beyond those NDC enhancements, we continue to hold the hand of the countries through our project facilitation and financial facilitation support. And we will continue to work with countries through various means like the Climate Investment Platform and the investment forums to try and find finance to support these projects going forward. So this is a small team which can be contacted. For the Latin American, Caribbean region, Jose Toron and Fabian Berrara are available, and my director, Gurbus Gonil, or I, are also available to support any requests from the countries. So with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Binu, for this presentation, which I think it clearly outlines the importance of governments commit to renewable energy in their NDCs and identifies the key areas in which support is provided to countries for their enhancement and implementation. We will now begin a panel discussion addressing the role of climate change in the recently revised targets and hear from organizations working with countries on improving their NDCs. The panel will be moderated by Regional Ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean of UK COP26 Presidency, Fiona Clowder. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you to Binu for that very, very interesting overview of the work of IRENA in the region. And I'm delighted to welcome to this panel 4 distinguished speakers: Omar Alcock, who is the Senior Technical Officer of the Climate Change Division of the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change from Jamaica. And Omar has served as a senior economist and more recently as a Senior Technical Officer responsible for mitigation actions at the Climate Change Division. But I'm sure what we're all going to be very interested in is Mr. Alcock was the technical lead for Jamaica's recently updated NDC. And we look forward to hearing about the vision in that updated NDC. I'm also pleased to welcome Cassie Flynn, Strategic Advisor on Climate Change and Head of the Climate Promise from UNDP. This is the largest offer of support in the world for nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. She has previously served as Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister of Fiji in his role as COP23 President. And Cassie also has published a number of books to do with climate finance and climate change. It's also a pleasure to see here Juan Pedro Cell, Chief of the Climate Change Unit of the Ministry of Energy, Chile. Juan has nearly 20 years of experience on climate change related matters, many of them dedicated to multilateral negotiations under the UNFCCC. He participated in some of the key landmarks, including the Kyoto Protocol, the Marrakesh Accords, and the debate that culminated in the landmark under the UNFCCC, such as the Paris Agreement. He now works in Chile's Ministry of Energy as Chief of Climate Change, and in this role has continued to follow up climate change negotiations. And last but by no means least, it's a great pleasure to see Pablo Vieira, Global Director, Regional Specialist for Latin America and the Caribbean in the NDC Partnership. And in this role, Pablo builds efforts that help build momentum for ambitious climate and development actions. Pablo is a leading figure in the environmental, green growth and sustainable rural development sectors in Colombia. And before joining the NDC Partnership, he served as advisor to President Juan Manuel Santos, managing Colombia's accession to the OECD and supporting the coordination and implementation of commitments on the environment and climate change. So panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. And really, I think what we're all going to be interested to hear is your insights, your practical experience, and your advice and ideas for all of us in taking forward both planning for NDCs, but also crucially their implementation. And perhaps, Omar, perhaps if we could start with you, and please can you tell us more about Jamaica and the recently revised NDC, which I think showed great leadership in the region in submitting that second NDC, but please tell us more about it, the key features, the challenges, and the way forward. Omar, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, His Excellency Fiona Clowder. Good morning to all the participants present today, to my colleagues and fellow panelists. Pleasant greetings to you all. Thank you on behalf of the government of Jamaica for giving us this opportunity to share with the world what it is that we're trying to embark on as it relates to reductions in emissions and reductions in GHG emissions in particular, and how we have done so through our updated NDC, which we submitted late June of this year to the UNFCCC. Just to start, I wanted to firstly give a quick background so that persons would understand where we're coming from as it relates to our first NDC. Our first NDC, it was submitted as an INDC in November 2015 and later became officially our first NDC once we had ratified the Paris Agreement in 2017. That NDC had timelines up to 2030, but was only predicated on the policies, the programs, projects, activities out of the energy sector. A sector you could appreciate is critical to efforts to reduce GHG emission levels. Relative to our business as usual scenario in 2030, that first NDC estimated savings of around 1.1 to 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. Subsequent to that first NDC, there was no other option to either present something completely new, update, or to revise our commitments that we had elaborated in that NDC. Jamaica decided to update and to provide enhancements to that. In enhancing the NDC, we looked at what the current position was in compared to the first NDC, the policies government had committed themselves to since then, additional projects, programs, and activities that had come on stream, but might not have been taken into consideration in the first NDC. So we did that assessment and analysis. Now, as it relates to the energy sector specifically, the energy sector currently makes the largest sectoral contribution for CO2 for us in Jamaica. The total GHG emission for total GHG emissions. Some of this is highlighted in Jamaica's third national communications, which shows that the largest contributions to CO2 emissions from within the energy sector itself are from electricity generation, mining and bauxite, and road transportation. So while preparing the updated NDC, our analysis showed that baseline energy demand was projected to increase by approximately 23% over the period 2019 to 2030. And the main drivers for that increase would have come from the industrial energy demand and increased energy demand in commerce and services. This would mean baseline energy emissions increasing by approximately 8% over that same period. Might seem minuscule, but that 8% does contribute to adverse effects to climate change. A number of energy sector commitments were then identified, all of which would contribute to decarbonizing the sector and ultimately emission reductions. And I'll quickly list some of those that were considered during our analysis to produce the updated NDC. And some of these include net billing infrastructure, net billing initiatives, targeted reductions in transmission and distribution losses, use of natural gas in our mining and bauxite sectors, switching of lighting infrastructure within our public sector facilities, such as schools and hospitals, smart LED street lighting initiatives, introduction of natural gas within our public transportation system by 2050. Over 100 new buses are expected to be on the streets or retrofitted using this versus diesel, which of course has a higher sulfur content. The potential to include a B5 blend into our diesel mix, improve CHP, combined heat and power in our aluminum refining processes, reduce what, and I could go on and on and on, right? But from the list, which I didn't even finish, there were 5 key commitments that drove the emission reductions in the energy sector. And of course, assisted as it relates to reductions announced in our updated NDC. And I'll go through those 5 very quickly now. Reductions from the energy sector where emissions are reduced through the expansion of renewable energy capacity. And this is coming out of our integrated resource plan that was developed by the Energy Vision in collaboration with several energy stakeholders. More recently as well, the Energy Minister himself has recently announced plans are being put in place to procure up to 268 megawatts of electricity generation, primarily only from renewable resources by 2025. And this is significant for a country that has electric capacity of approximately 1,000 megawatts to have 268 megawatts more on the grid is significant for us. And this includes energy from solar and wind technology, with 70 megawatts from hydro, biomass, and waste technologies. We also expect improved combined heat and power, as mentioned before, in alumina refining. And of course, industrial demand for electricity is reduced through the introduction of energy efficient measures by increased efficiency of CHP technology in alumina refining and reduces emissions by allowing alumina refining to rely less on grid generated electricity. We expect targeted reductions in technical, in transmission and distribution losses in the electricity sector. Reduced electricity transmission and distribution losses decreases the required generation to meet the expected demand, and hence the emission associated with this generation. Fourth, we expect increased natural gas usage in the bauxite and mining sector, which means that the industrial emissions will further reduce by the switch from residual fuel oil to natural gas. And finally, we also expect improvements in urban traffic management, which means that the introduction of urban traffic management systems in our capital city, Kingston, would drive the reduction of transport emissions. Now, His Excellency, I think you would want me to also highlight some of the differences between our first and our existing or updated NDC. Yeah, all right. So,
can I ask you to be brief?
Yes.
Because I'm very keen to get the other speakers in and also to try and
right.
make
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem. So, all right, let me do that quickly. So, at the sectoral level, the largest emission reductions come from the electricity sector, which account for 73% of the total abatement by 2030. We expect the large reduction in electricity emissions, particularly to be driven by substantial change in technology. In addition, by 2030, commitments that reduce demand are expected to decrease generation by up to about 25%. And that is significant for us. And with the energy ambition in the updated NDC, we expect Jamaica's commitment to be largely driven by a wide set of adaptation and other core benefits as well. So for instance, from an economic perspective, there's an increased energy security that would come with the fact that we're doing fuel switching and relying less on fossil fuels, which Jamaica, by the way, do not have. We expect positive environmental consequences. We expect as well social benefits as these energy commitments speak to less air pollution emission, reduction in pollution exposure, and so on. And so these were not previously highlighted in our first NDC, these core benefits and possible commitments that could drive further enhancements in adaptation. In addition to that, if you look at the figures themselves, the changes between 1.1 and 1.5 million tons in the first NDC to 1.8 to 2 million tons of CO2 equivalent in the current NDC means that the absolute level of ambition in Jamaica's unconditional commitment could increase by more than 60% when comparing the first NDC with the updated. I think I'll probably stop there. Thank you.
Well, Omer, thank you very much for that clear and comprehensive overview and also highlighting how with real drive and ambition, Jamaica's been able to make some real changes that hold a lot of promise for the future. I'd like next to turn to Juan Pedro Searle to simply tell us about Chile, who's also brought forward the revised NDC, and perhaps share with us some of the highlights, but also kind of what have you learned along the way? What recommendations and insights would you give to others? And then I'll turn to Cassie and Pablo to comment from their more generic perspectives. But Juan Pedro, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fiona. It's nice to see you again, and especially in this new role. So congrats. It's very important for the region. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think this is the type of discussion that we need to have and to try to see what is happening in other regions and other countries. Yeah, concerning our new NDC, well, the main highlight is one, I'll be brief. One is that it was a multi-stakeholder process. That was I mean, worked by it was called by the Ministry of the Environment, sorry. It was around 18 months of different workshops with the private sector, with academia, with other ministries to come up with this new figures of the NDC. And the role of the Ministry of Energy was essential in the sense that we provided all the scenarios to come up with what type of activities, projects, actions we're gonna be able to implement from here to 2030. But we also look at this, long-term view of 2050, because we know that the NDCs are relevant, but are just stepping stones to get there. So that's one main message. Second, that I would say that the main highlights from this NDC compared to the previous one, though we consider the first one as being ambitious, this one is totally different in the sense that we changed a number of indicators. For instance, we changed from an intensity-based target to an absolute emissions target, which is more traceable, I would say, more MRVable, if you wish. That's one thing. The other one is that we were able to introduce a carbon budget, which is essential in the sense that it provides us, the government, to a more safe space to track what is happening in different sectors. And to be honest, we try to follow the example of the UK on this, because the UK has a carbon budget, and I think it's an essential instrument to have. And the third figure from this new NDC is that we also adopted a maximum peak in emissions by 2025. So those are the main highlights. In terms of recommendations for other countries or jurisdictions, is that we, you need to try to promote partnerships with different stakeholders, especially with the private sector. Because as you may know, Chile, one of the main measures in the new NDC is coal phase out by 2040. And in spite that measure will only impact at around 13% of emission reduction by 2050, it's the measure that will trigger a number of other measures in the energy sector, in transport, for instance, electrification of transport, electrification of other industries, and of course, the more rapid penetration of renewable energy. And that is already happening, and that agreement is in place. So instead of 8 plants that will be out of the system by 2024, now we have 11 plants that will be out of the system. So we might reach this this goal before 2040. So that's our aim and our main, I would say, aim in this new NDC. And and the main recommendation to others: sit together, and not only with the private sector, but also with other ministries, because sometimes you think that you take it for granted that other ministries think alike, but you need to, of course, sit and try to see I'm not talking about just measures, but also the enabling instruments. For instance, we know that we are very behind carbon pricing. We now have a climate change bill, and I will stop here. Sorry, we have a climate change bill in Congress, which will, of course, have this. And this is also important, Fiona, or Mrs. Claus. I don't know. You have a big role now. This is important. Why? Because you need to have this carbon neutrality goal somewhat embedded in a regulation. So we will have this climate change bill, of course, passed by Congress, and we will have this as a mandatory commitment. That's one thing. And also how to mainstream those commitments for instance, in the energy sector regulation. Those are two. And you need to, as I said, sit together with the private sector. You might have the most, nice public policy on climate change with this carbon neutrality goal, but if you don't have the private sector on board, it will be just a beautiful policy, but with no, you need the chariots. I don't know, carros. I don't know. You understand better Spanish. You need to move it. So you need to move it, and the private sector is and carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is something that we are very close looking at, because we feel that you need to not also provide the stick, but also some carrots.
Okay, well, thank you so much for some very powerful pointers there.
Yeah, and one last, I'm very sorry. And you have to have the scientific community behind, because all this exercise that we developed like in 18 months before COP25 was also backed by the scientific community. So thumbs up were given from them. So that's also relevant.
very much so. And
Full stop.
as a scientist myself, I'd very much endorse that from my original background. Okay, time as ever is moving on. So I'm very quickly now going to turn to Cassie, and we'll come back to some of the points Omar and Juan Pedro have raised. But Cassie, can you tell us more about the Climate Promise initiative, particularly around the impact that that's had in NDCs? And what are your plans looking forward to the next year, and how can you help some of the countries that are listening?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here and to be a part of this conversation. And even just as we've heard from Omar and Juan Pedro, there is so much. And congratulations to Jamaica and Chile for really leading the way on these ambitious NDCs. And at UNDP, we've been very proud to play our part and to be able to support countries on this journey. And we've certainly learned a lot from Jamaica and Chile in this. As you mentioned, UNDP is the host to something called the Climate Promise. And this is supporting 115 countries around the world on enhancing their NDCs. And this includes 36 LDCs, 28 SIDS, 14 higher emitters, and 42 fragile states. And we're very, very proud that all of this, we consider this a contribution to the good work of the NDC partnership and Pablo's good work there. And then also we have a fantastic partnership with IRENA that is really sort of at the heart of the delivery of this. IRENA is our largest technical partner, and support with IRENA is being provided in 30 countries. And so as we have seen this really play out, and I think that when we started the Climate Promise a little over a year ago, I don't think anyone really thought that a global pandemic would be around the corner. And so I think what has really happened here is that these NDCs have really taken on new meaning. And as we heard from Juan Pedro and Omar, these moves that they're making are really transformational. And at the Climate Promise, within the region, we've been really trying to focus on 25 countries that are a part of the Climate Promise. This includes 2 higher emitters, Argentina and Mexico, 11 SIDS, 1 LDC, and then 4 Amazon countries. And the idea is that we have really wanted to help countries to sort of overcome any hurdles to ambition, whether that is sort of having more political will, whether that is being able to ramp up what's in the intended NDC, or incorporating new sectors and greenhouse gases, tackling finance, or tackling issues of transparency. And of the 6 countries in the region that have already submitted their NDCs, UNDP is quite proud to have supported 4 countries, Ecuador, Suriname, Grenada, and Chile, of course. And we think that, with our role, we really tried to support countries in particular with this idea of being as inclusive as possible. And in Chile and Ecuador, we focused a lot on, as exactly what Juan Pedro was saying, this multi-stakeholder process and trying to help countries to bring all of these players to the table, because we know that if we're going to achieve these NDCs in the end, and if we're going to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we have to have everyone at the table. We need private sector. We do need civil society. We need researchers and scientists. It all has to come together. So that's something that we've been really focusing on. A couple of things also as we move forward, we are trying to think about how we can expand on this. And as was said earlier, the idea that these can't just be beautiful policies on paper. How do we actually turn these words into action on the ground? And we're already starting to have conversations with ministries of environment and energy and finance about what that actually might look like. And sort of some practical approaches. And for example, in Grenada and Suriname, we're already starting to think about what a national adaptation plan might look like as it moves forward in the context of an NDC, and what that might actually look like on the ground. So it's really an exciting moment, I think, for the region. There is a lot going on. Certainly the big commitments on energy, and certainly the big commitments that are going to have, I think, benefits that don't just cut across the SDGs, but also really help to deliver support at this critical moment in the context of COVID. So we're very happy to be a part of it, and I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Cassie, thank you very much, and apologies that my own technology suddenly decided to do something very odd earlier on. I hope you can now see and hear me again. But thank you very much for that overview, and particularly, as did our other speakers, highlighting the importance of bringing in everyone, and particularly the private sector, to move this agenda forward. So I'd now like to turn to Pablo Vieira, to tell us more about the CAEP program and the role it's played in helping Latin American and Caribbean countries in the review and enhancement of their NDCs. And particularly, Pablo, can you tell us about best practices that you would like to highlight? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador. And it's great to be part of this event and this panel with such good friends sharing the stage today. So let me start with a brief introduction of the NDC Partnership. The NDC Partnership is an international platform that currently has more than 180 members, including over 110 countries and more than 70 international institutions. And the partnership works together to support countries in the implementation of their NDCs. So that we can effectively support the implementation and the achievement of the Paris Agreement, but also while driving sustainable development and the SDGs. We are basically a mechanism to strengthen the cooperation, to facilitate cooperation amongst different stakeholders on the ground to accelerate and advance the implementation of climate action. We work together with governments to bring the needs that they have in order to be able to implement their NDCs. And we share these needs with the members of the partnership so that we can mobilize the technical, financial, and knowledge support that these countries require to be able to respond to the needs that they have. With the main objective of mobilizing fresh economic resources and technical capacity, and strengthen the cooperation amongst the different stakeholders associated and working on the updating of NDCs. Last September, the NDC Partnership launched its Climate Action Enhancement Package, or CAP. This initiative started from a conversation that we had with our member countries that were looking at the process of enhancing their NDCs, of updating their NDCs, and wanted to avoid the issues that they had in the first round of NDCs. It is very clear that countries had to rush the preparation of their NDCs. They did not have the technical capacity, the information. They did not have time to bring together all the relevant stakeholders to produce a high quality, high ambitious NDC during the first round. So with that in mind, and of course, responding to the mandate of the Paris Agreement in terms of partners coming together and mobilizing resources to support developing countries in their efforts, we created this initiative that was designed to provide the support for the updating of NDCs, but also send a strong message in terms of you can increase your ambition because we will have your back once you submit this more ambitious NDCs in supporting the implementation of this NDC. So through CAP and working very closely together with 46 of our partners and very closely together with Cassie, her team, and UNDP and the Climate Promise, we're currently supporting 65 countries that are updating their NDCs. That represents around 16% of global emissions and 23% of the global population. 46 of our members and non-members are supporting these efforts through technical and financial support. And we have been able to mobilize over $46 million in under 12 months to provide the support that these countries are requiring to update their NDCs. Specifically, if we focus on Latin America and the Caribbean, we have 24 member countries in the partnership, and we're supporting 20 of those under CAP to update their NDCs. mobilizing over $16 million in the region and bringing together the support from 25 of our members. CAP has turned into an initiative that has pioneered in a way that it supports countries by allowing them to bring actions that they would not be able to do without the necessary resources, or that maybe they left outside of their planning process at the beginning of the process. So with coordinated support coming from a big number of partners, what we're doing is we're facilitating this revision and updating process. To date, 3 members of the NDC partnership that received support, that are receiving CAP support, have presented updated NDCs. Chile and Jamaica, that are part of this panel, and Grenada. And we expect 8 more countries to do it by the end of the year, and the other 9 early in 2021. All of them committing to higher ambition, to higher quality, to implementable NDCs that are realistic and that can bring us closer to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. So even with the pandemic and its economic and social crisis, the countries in the region have demonstrated their strong commitment, as we have heard today from Chile and Jamaica, to update their NDCs, showing how important it is for countries in the region to bring in climate action in an urgent manner to provide support to their development, even to their recovery of the COVID pandemic. This is very clear when we look at the current NDCs that have been submitted in the region, where ambition has been increased in all of the cases. Just let me go a little bit into what we saw in terms of requests and best practices. So countries in the region are focusing mostly on energy, with 28% of the requests that we received as under CAP. AFLU, so agriculture, forestry, and other land uses, with 21% of the requests. Transport, which can also be brought as part of energy, with 14% of the requests, and the management of residues and waste, with 14%. Specifically, what they're looking for in terms of support is to improve the data, their baselines, and their MRV systems, to strengthen their consultation processes with all relevant stakeholders in society, to define specific objectives and goals for the new for the new NDC, especially looking at new sectors and areas of work, and determining the costs of those actions, so that countries can actually accelerate the implementation and have realistic goals set up for their NDCs. Best practices. Definitely, CAP has shown the importance of bringing together different stakeholders to provide the necessary technical and financial resources so that countries can execute actions that they would not be able to do it unless they had these resources available. Also, to serve as a platform for the coordination of the many relevant stakeholders that are both providing support and pitching in with knowledge, with capacity, with their important information. So bringing them together under a single framework has provided to be extremely useful. Finally, CAP has demonstrated the opportunity for other stakeholders, other donors, other implementing partners to come and support countries where they don't have access to normally. So strengthening and broadening the scope of work and the amount of stakeholders that can come together to support those countries. So let me stop there. These are the main lessons learned, and we're very excited about the achievements under CAP, the work that we're doing with our close collaboration with countries in the region and with UNDP and the Climate Promise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Before we talk more about some of the general themes that have come up in this panel, whilst you were speaking, there was a specific question about Honduras and whether you're working with Honduras. That didn't, I don't think that featured in Binu's map, so perhaps you might like to comment on that. And I'm sure all of us have been very sad to see the great impacts of the recent hurricanes on Honduras and others in Central America, and our thoughts are with you. Perhaps that in itself raises another question. We're talking about bringing forward NDCs in an orderly, measured way, how can countries also adapt to some of the devastation of climate change impacts and keep momentum up in such circumstances on NDCs? Pablo, back to you.
Great, thank you. And well, on Honduras, I'm very happy to say that under CAP, we are supporting the government on the development of its strategy to increase their ambition on the energy sector, looking specifically at subsectors like electric mobility, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and bioenergy. So a lot going on in the energy sector with the support from the European Union, from NREL, and from UN Environment. So it's a great example of a country that is receiving support and that we're expecting to come forward with a more ambitious NDC, especially looking at opportunities around the energy sector in the coming months. And on your second question, on your second part of your question, let me say that, of course, we've been talking about support provided to countries in terms of their capacity to update their NDC. But as I said before, we need to make sure that resources are available also for the implementation of those more ambitious goals. You can imagine that countries go through a very difficult process to find ways to increase ambition, but they also find themselves in a situation where more resources are necessary to mobilize resources from the private sector, like we've heard, but also international cooperation, also technical assistance that will allow them to accelerate the implementation of those new commitments. But if we're going to be talking about implementing NDCs, we need to look at the current circumstances. We need to look at the pandemic. We need to look at social and economic challenges that countries are facing today because of the pandemic and because of their normal development issues. But we need to see it in a way where we see this as a great opportunity to make sure that those priorities that countries have in terms of their climate action are integrated effectively into the economic recovery efforts so that they can reinforce each other in a way. So based on our guiding principle as a partnership to bring together the climate and development agendas, and based on requests by countries, we launched earlier this year in June our Economic Advisory Initiative. And in less than 2 months, we started deploying more than 50 economic advisors to ministries of finance and planning, embedding them there in 33 countries of our members, including 11 in Latin America and the Caribbean. With this support, countries will be able to turn their recovery efforts into an opportunity to advance their climate priorities. 13 members of the partnership have been providing resources to embed these advisors. And we're also making sure that the lessons learned across this group of countries and economic advisors is shared through a thematic expert group and a network for green recovery, where we're going to be sharing all those lessons and making sure that even those that are not receiving direct support will be able to come in and learn from the experiences from other countries and make sure that their green recoveries are bringing in as much ambition as possible in terms of their climate priorities. So the partnership is supporting implementation, is supporting NDC updating, and now is supporting green recovery, making sure that countries have the full package of support that will allow them to tackle the short-term crisis with COVID-19, but also will allow them to transition in the long term to a more sustainable, climate neutral and resilient recovery model. So that's part of the work that we're doing. And of course, a lot of our members are providing that support directly to country, bringing the expertise in terms of economic recovery, macroeconomics, and bringing them their expertise in terms of climate ambition and climate priorities and the efforts that they're doing in updating their NDCs so that countries can bring all of that together and move forward and really turn this 2020 and 2021 into the great year that we were hoping for climate action. Thank you. Ambassador, you're in mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Pablo, for really inspiring us on both the work that's been going on, but also the access to help and expertise to help take action forward. Really, really helpful. Thank you. Time is over, is not with us, but I'd now like to ask our panel to comment further on how they see the year ahead of us. So if we all come together, hopefully in Glasgow in a year's time, what do you think we need to have achieved, and how do we do that? So first of all, I'm going to turn back to Omar and then again to Juan Pedro. So they've both described how their countries are really ahead of the game, how they've brought forward their revised NDCs. But my challenge to you now is how do your countries not rest on their laurels, as it were? What are you actually going to be doing in the next year that we can really see a difference by the time we all meet in Glasgow? Omar, would you like to comment first?
Thank you. So to answer the question, the year ahead, I think you said it quite excellently in your opening remarks earlier when you mentioned that the NDCs should be more than just a document or a commitment that is placed on the shelf. But of course, to be a living thing, it has to be something that is implementable. It has to be something that is practical. And one of the things that we try to do, as Juan Pablo mentioned, is to include the private sector, civil society organizations, NGOs, and other non-government type entities, so that they understand what it is that we are faced with and how the country intends to tackle those challenges. Our NDC is based on policies that the government has already committed to. And so we kind of a little bit ahead because the government has already said, we will go in this direction. And so it made life a little bit easier, but it's not all the time that persons are aware of the direction you're going. And so the consultations that we have would have encouraged persons to be involved, to be in the know, and to take action as well. And so for me, getting persons involved is key. For the year ahead, especially for a small island developing state or vulnerable state, being able to access the requisite financing to be able to implement, for instance, adaptation type and resilient type projects and activities would also lend assistance to what it is that we're looking to achieve. So for us, it's not only mitigation, but of course adaptation for very obvious reasons. But both of them can work together to do the job that is necessary. One, to reduce the GHG emissions and provide co-benefit to adaptation and to other areas. And two, build resilience, which also could provide co-benefits on the mitigation side to build up our resilience as a vulnerable state. As it relates to support, we so far have been involved with the CAPE program, so we're very grateful to the NDC partnership. We have had support from the World Bank and several consultancies that have been engaged as it relates to the development of analysis and studies. And if I could touch on the CAPE just for a little bit. So Pablo did a great job in identifying what it is that the CAPE is looking to achieve and how it has been assisting countries. And we have benefited and continue to benefit greatly from that particular experience. And for us, developing things like a research agenda to be able to say climate change is at the top of the list, regardless of where it is your mindset is. If it's governance, climate change should be on your list. If it's engineering, climate change should be on your list, and I could go on and on. And of course, trying to understand as well what the public expenditure has been like over the last several years, where we have been impacted by numerous climate-related events, whether it's heavy rainfall, hurricane events, flooding, losing some of our shorelines as a result of sea level rise. And so being able to do that kind of assessment through the CAPE program also assists. And so over the course of the year, we expect to have that kind of analysis and information available to us to be better able to make decisions, and for policymakers to be better able to present results and solutions, I should say, to bring us to a point where we'll be more resilient as a country. And so for the year, I think the year can be a good year. We don't have time or convenience to waste anymore. We don't have the convenience of time to waste anymore. You mentioned before the struggles that Central America, for instance, faced over the last several weeks as a result of hurricanes and inclement weather. I can assure you Jamaica faced similar challenges during those same times. As the hurricane passed just south of us, but it did leave excessive rainfall, which caused dramatic flooding, landslides, infrastructure loss and damages. And so for us, it is very critical. We are already out of our sustainable zone. And if we go any further out, existence would be in question. Livelihoods would be in question. And so the encouragement is for all states, for everyone to commit to reduction in GHG, to commit to providing financing for our small island developing states, as this is critical to us being able to develop and protect what we have as a nation. Thank you. It's excellent. I was getting a little emotional, right?
Thank you, Omar. But I think that genuine passion, commitment is so important and inspires all of us. So thank you. And thank you for highlighting the importance that time is not on our side, and that your country and many other small island developing states and vulnerable countries are living that reality. And that's why we have to make a difference on this agenda. Juan Pedro, can I turn back to you and also put to you the challenge of what next in this year? And of course, for Chile, you faced your own quite momentous political and social changes, whilst also hosting the COP25 presidency and very much helping build a framework on which we're now all moving forward for COP26. But tell us how, with Chile's NDC, how are you going to keep up the focus and momentum over the next year?
Super, thank you, Fiona. Excellent question. Not easy to answer, or has many answers, I guess. Well, very specifically on Article 6, as we still hold COP presidency, then we will continue supporting the UK team in trying to really, reach the agreement in COP26 next year. In terms of ambition, I guess that we will continue promoting engagement with others to engage in the Climate Ambition Alliance. In terms of, if you ask me about our domestic efforts, yeah, it's hard to say how next year will be in terms of this pandemic, but we're crossing fingers that we'll have a number of different vaccines and to get rid of this huge problem. But we are thinking here that we need to, instead of putting this as a challenge, I guess, or we guess here that the NDC and the carbon neutrality plan should be aligned with how to recover from this pandemic. So we are starting to understand that, and I guess that's the only way to be successful. Otherwise, you will be detouring, funding for specific direct impacts instead of, continue having this long-term vision. So that said, in the energy sector, in the ministry, we will put in place a carbon neutrality plan, because we know the what, but we need now to put this in concrete actions. So we will deliver this. We hope we will be in a position to deliver this plan before COP26. Also, I mentioned before the climate change bill. So we also will promote that this bill will should be approved very shortly. I guess if you had any chance of looking at the press, the local press, of course, but it's very encouraging to see private companies from the energy sector, companies that still have, you know, we'll say, let's say, stranded assets like, you know, coal. They will not only are part of this coal phase out initiative, but they are also announcing clean investments in the near future with 1,000, you know, billions of US dollars, especially some of the companies that have most of their assets are in the fossil fuel arena, if you wish. So it's very encouraging that at the same time that the public sector is putting in place policies to cope with the COVID and also climate change, but you have also some big companies in the private sector also align with our goals. So yeah, nobody has this crystal ball to say, I mean next year will be not as difficult as this one, but we have to move. I mean, we have to continue and cope with everything. It's not easy, but I guess we need to see this as I said at the beginning, I'm repeating myself, sorry. We need to see this as an opportunity and not a challenge. And one last final word, I'm happy that someone, I think it was Cassie, that brought this issue of adaptation, because we now need to understand in the Ministry of Energy also, and we will put that into the scenarios, that we need to understand how climate resilience is so important to reach carbon neutrality. Because we're assuming that we will, you know, implement whatever technology comes on the way, but you also have the impact of climate change, and you need to put those into the equation of carbon neutrality, because those two are together. And also COVID is also an example. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think very powerful examples there of how this agenda has to be embedded at the heart of how a country is moving forward. No longer are environment and climate issues a kind of special add-on area for governments or indeed wider society and business. They are at the heart of what a country is about. Cassie, quickly, I'm going to turn to you and then to Pablo. Also in this year ahead, how can we further really draw in business and wider society so that this isn't just about governments, but it's a collective effort to encourage change in our world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I think that this is really at the heart of, I think, our challenge really over the course of the coming year. And let me sort of talk about kind of three ways I see this playing out. One is certainly as we are looking at COP next year, we have a huge diplomatic push. We're seeing momentum around, you know, the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement is on Saturday. We are seeing a number of countries start to come forward and make some pretty big declarations, in many ambitious declarations about how they see themselves evolving over the coming 5 and then mid-century. And so I think here there is a narrative that is really important, and sort of bringing all of these different pieces together, and that the Paris Agreement isn't just about governments around a table, that it really is a whole of society approach, and that if we are going to achieve these goals, we really do need to have everyone working together around the world, and being able to portray that in a concrete way of what that actually looks like. The other piece of this that I think is really important certainly comes to this idea of being able to see action quite quickly coming out of NDCs and toward long-term strategies. When we look at sort of some of the trends that are happening in the region, of course, we have, you know, for just to take urbanization, for example, we are seeing countries really start to focus in on things like renewable energy and transport, energy efficiency, things that really help to respond to some of these challenges in real time. And we can't achieve any of that. And we've seen that with the climate promise, that we have seen, you know, all countries have energy in some way in their targets. We're working with about 20 of 25 countries in the region on energy. And one of the big sort of things that we get when we say, okay, well, what does it take to actually to be able to deliver this now? And the first thing that often is referenced is finance. And this is public finance, but it's also being able to leverage finance and to be able to have the right financial environment in which to attract private sector funds. Because we've all read the story a million times where a handful of countries get a majority of this private sector funding internationally. And it's how do we break that open? How do we create the right environment within countries to be able to unlock this? And then sort of just a third piece to this is COVID. I think that really being able to think about how the discussions around COVID can inform the climate discussions and how the climate discussions can inform COVID. Because ideally, you know, we would love to see this sort of this feedback loop where they are reinforcing the ambition of each other, and that there's some really important linkages here. And certainly in the region, what we have been seeing, and UNDP is also responsible UN-wide for the socioeconomic elements of a green recovery. And so we're doing that in 170 countries. And we've really tried to leverage that when it comes to the climate promise in order to see NDCs as this building block toward a green recovery, and helping countries with, you know, socioeconomic analyses and helping them with stakeholder engagement to really start to drive and make some big choices, in particular within stimulus packages. Because with stimulus packages, you know, countries are making big bets on various sectors. And if you can make a big bet in clean energy, there's such an impact on jobs that is really exciting. And I think in particular, a really important choice to be making right now, given what we know is happening with the economic crisis around the world. And that, of course, requires various levels of stakeholder engagement that go beyond sort of the tradition, but actually embedding all of these stakeholders within the process in which these conversations are happening, and within the process in which opportunities are made available. So those are kind of the three things that really come to mind with this question. And I think that we have a lot to be hopeful for in the next year, even though that we are faced with this level of multiplying crises that we are seeing. I think there is a lot of reason to think that we can actually do this well, and we can come out on the other side stronger than when we entered.
Thank you, Cassie. And now finally, I'd like to turn to Pablo and further pursue this theme of the green recovery. And in particular, how do we further bring in these wider interests and get people right? I feel that in preparing for COP26, there's been a lot of very, very positive meetings, not least those facilitated by Irina. But by the nature of our virtual world, they're self-selecting. We tend to be talking to like-minded people about the COP26 agenda and priorities, NDCs, etc. So how do we bring this agenda to life for everybody, and to tie this into, as Cassie has been outlining, recovery from coronavirus, and also making countries resilient to deal with future challenges, whatever they may be?
Thank you. Yes, there's a huge opportunity here, and the opportunity comes in many ways. First, coronavirus has raised, as you just mentioned, the importance of resiliency and the capacity for countries, for societies, for economies to be able to resist the shocks, pandemics, climate, and others is fundamental there. And this is something that is cross-cutting and that will allow us, if we take this opportunity, to prepare better for climate action. Second, there is an opportunity, a true opportunity in terms of climate action. And this is driving this economic recovery in many ways, bringing new jobs, bringing new opportunities, bringing that those economic benefits and social benefits that are there. So if countries find those opportunities, as we're hoping that they will with economic advisors, for example, they will actually be able to drive this recovery and accelerate that transition into a more sustainable, climate neutral and resilient economy. Also, this is a great opportunity to show and to bring in other stakeholders to the discussion. So I very much agree with Cassie in terms of the whole of society approach. That's fundamental. But you need to start first with a whole of government approach. So ministries of finance and ministries of planning have a huge role in both driving the recovery, but also in driving climate action. If they now use this as an opportunity and get convinced, empowered to actually bring these two efforts together and more broadly bring development with climate as a single agenda, then we have the champions that will drive this further than normal. They will bring in stakeholders from the private sector, for example. They will bring those economic sectors that might not be convinced about climate action. They will include climate in the development processes, in the budgetary processes, and they will allow the resources to flow in that direction. So this is another huge opportunity that we have. So the way I see it is that if we drive the recovery of COVID in a way that is sustainable, that brings in climate action, we will take a huge step that would probably not be possible without it. And this is something that is kind of a silver lining to accelerate that transformation towards a greener economy, an economy that is more mindful and includes climate action in a more effective way. And I see this ministers of finance and ministers of planning really seeing this opportunity. But of course, this comes with strong messages from the financial institutions in terms of where money can go. This comes with strong messages to the private sector, where the resources that will be injected for the recovery will go and what are the conditions. So it's a process that will allow climate to drive the recovery, but will also be a huge opportunity to fund and finance those projects that have been very difficult to achieve at this point, especially in adaptation, through this building resilience in order to recover from COVID-19.
Thank you very, very much. This has been a most stimulating discussion. I've learned a tremendous amount, as I'm sure others have who've been listening in. Thank you very, very much, panelists. I'm not going to attempt to really summarize all the many, many things you've told us about, but I covered some broad ground, both around the framework set by governments, the importance of NDCs and long-term strategies, but also the pragmatic actions that can be taken, not just by governments, but by the private sector, by wider society. And that this is all happening in a much changed world, a world which I think has left us all with a lot of sadness and deep shock. But we all know there are greater challenges to come from climate change. Many are already living that reality. All of us need to adapt and be more resilient to that. But perhaps these challenges of this world have also made it a more collaborative world. And so I'd like to thank Irina, all the organisations involved in this meeting, and most of all to everybody on the line listening in, because we can make a difference. And I'd just like to finish by saying I hope that everyone will join us again in the virtual world at the moment, but on Saturday for the Climate Ambition Summit, where we will see leaders talking about their future NDCs and how they are taking those forward. And I think my challenge is for everyone in this conference to challenge their organisations, their governments, their representatives for COP on, are we doing enough? Are we doing it fast enough? Thank you very much. Jose, back to you.
Thanks to Ambassador Clowder and the panelists for this very interesting discussion. We have reached the end of the first day of the virtual meeting. I want to thank the presenters and panelists, as well as all those attending the event. We appreciate your presence and invite you to join us tomorrow at the same time for the second and last day of this virtual event. Thank you all and good afternoon.